Okay. Perfect. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the University of Michigan's Museum of Anthropological Archaeology Brown Bag Lecture Series. Our speaker today is Dr. Zhao. Dr. Zhao is a lecturer from the School of History and Civilization of Shaanxi Normal University in Xi'an, China. He received his PhD from the University of Pittsburgh in 2020. His doctoral dissertation focused on the study of land use patterns of prehistoric social communities at the northern slope of Yinshan Mountain in Southeast Mongolian Plateau. His research expertise includes prehistoric Chinese archaeology, lithic analysis, archaeological statistics, and spatial analysis. Today, he will be presenting his work entitled Neolithic Pathways in East Mongolian Plateau, Early Sedentism and Subsistence Strategy. This talk will focus on both new and existing data from early Neolithic sites on the Eastern Mongolian Plateau to reveal a simultaneous shift towards the increasing intensity and stability of site use, with distinct variation in the organization and settlement of settlement and subsistence across biogeographic zones. During the presentation, we ask that you keep your video off and audio muted. Please type your questions in the question and answer box at the bottom. At the end of the presentation, we will have time to answer any questions. Thank you, and please welcome Dr. Zhao.
Okay, thank you for inviting me to have the presentation. So the topic I want to share with us today is the phenomenon of early sedentism in early Neolithic period in Eastern Mongolian Plateau. And we'll mainly talk about its patterns, its economic basis, and the reasons of the early sedentism in Eastern Mongolian Plateau. So the geographic focus of this talk is Mongolian Plateau, and it's located at the eastern part of the Eurasia steppe. And from this map, we can see that it's located actually in the inner part of Asia continent, and it's relatively far away from the ocean, and it's heavily impacted by the Siberia high pressure climate system. So it has a semi-arid to arid climate and has extreme seasonality with very long and cold winter and short growing seasons. The general carrying capacity in this land is relatively low, and the landform are often covered by the steppe or the gobi vegetation. So actually, it's not an easy and a pleasant area for people to live. And we used to assume that the environment in Mongolian Plateau is too harsh for supporting the fully sedentary lifeways, because people could probably not get or produce enough food when they settle down in one spot of the area, or they may soon deplete the resource in the circumscribed environment and cause the serious environmental disasters. So in this case, we have thought that nomadism is a very successful cultural adaptation for people to live in the steppe land. But in a very long time perspective, we can say that the nomadism appeared actually quite late. It's appeared only at Iron Age. So we did not know clearly how people lived and adapt to the steppe environment of Mongolian Plateau long before the emergence of nomadism. And based on the very limited archaeological recordings and even our own imagination, we used to think that people were highly mobile hunter-gatherers long before they became full-time herders. But the newest evidence has identified a transition to initial sedentary lifeways, at least at the eastern part of Mongolian Plateau, during the peak of the Holocene Climatic Optimum, which is culturally correspond to the early Neolithic age. And this discovery really challenged our stereotyped thinking, and it make us feel that it's necessary to learn the specific patterns and the reasons of such initial sedentism. And from this map, we can see that the eastern part of Mongolian Plateau is closer to the monsoon-affected zone of the eastern part of China, and it has relatively lower elevation. So it has somehow a milder climate compared with the hinterland. And from this map, we can also see that the sites which show the evidence of early sedentism are distributed into 3 sub-regions. And from the north to the south, these regions are namely the Hulunbuir Steppe, the upper West Liao River Valley, and northern Yinshan Mountain region. So our research question is how the sedentary patterns like and differ from each other across the 3 regions I mentioned before. And the second is about the economic basis for the sedentary lifeways across these 3 regions. And finally, we want to explore the specific reasons for the emergence and end of the attempt of such early sedentism. So at the start of our talk, we need to clarify the definition of sedentism, because this word actually is used in many different ways and people have different definitions of it. So the most common definition is that at least a part of the population remains at the same location throughout the entire year. So the entire year is a key word for defining the sedentism. But people also have more rigorous or more generalized way to define this word. For the more rigorous term, people reserve the term sedentary for long-term settlement. That means only when the settlement has placed in one area for decades of years, not only for 1 or 2 years. Only in this case, we can call it as sedentism. Well, for the more generalized term, at least a greater part of the year was occupied by the greater part of the population, we can call it as sedentary system. So this different definitions of sedentism reflect that actually there's a continuum of settlement permanence from random wandering to permanent. Like in between the highly mobile lifeways and the fully sedentary lifeways, actually there's a range of different lifeways, and some of them might closer to the fully sedentary lifeways, but not as stable as the fully sedentism. So we can say that sedentism can be subdivided into degrees and types. In this talk, since we mainly focus on the initial attempt of sedentism, not talked about the fully sedentism, so we will use the most generalized term to define sedentism. So as long as the part of population in the group can stay in one place for a substantial time of the year and make heavy site use and investment and not move so often. So in that case, we will define it as sedentism. And that definition will be used in contrast to the highly mobile lifeways. Okay, let's move on and see the first area, the Hulunbuir region. And the Hulunbuir region is located at the most northern part of the three sub-regions I talked today. And it has very high latitude around closer and around to 50 degrees northern latitude. And this steppe is conceived as a very good piece of pastoral land today because it's covered by very large grasses. And the representative site in Neolithic period in this region are Hak and Tansan Black. And the Hak site located at the eastern part of the Hulunbuir steppe, and it's located in Inner Mongolia of China. And the Tansan Black located at the southwestern part of this area, and it's belong to Mongolian Republic. So let's first see the Hak site. This site located at the terrace of the Hala River and is surrounded by water in three directions. And it actually contains 7 cultural layers, but the most permanent and intensive site use was found on layer 7, which is about 8.5 to 8 kbp. And the strong evidence of sedentism in this site comes from the discovery of the pit house. And this pit house is shown as the picture here. And the area is larger than 50 square meters. So at that time period, it's a quite large pit house. And within the pit house, we can find 13 post holes distributed around, and also a layer of shells found beneath the living floor, which we think that it's used for moisture isolation. And also there are 12 pit structures, which possibly the maiden or storage pits were found within and around the pit house. And within the pit house, we can also find many animal bones and artifacts. And an important fact is that the species of animals hunted in different seasons can actually be found within the pit house. For example, we can find the fox bones, and the fox are usually hunted in winter for fur. And we also found the bones of pond heron. And the heron is a kind of migratory bird and is only accessible between April and October in Hulunbuir steppe. So the coexistence of their bones indicate that people might have used this site both in warmer and colder seasons of the year. Well, as for the economic basis of sedentism, I think we used to correlate sedentism with agriculture because we think that unless people can get or produce substantial amount of food resources within the very circumscribed environment, only in this case, the sedentism can be supported. But the growing body of archaeological discoveries and ethnographic recordings indicate that sometimes the intensive hunting-gathering economy in specific ways could also support certain forms of sedentism. And Hak is just in this case. In Hak site, we did not find evidence of agriculture, and we found that people focused heavily on the use of animal resources, especially the medium to small-sized animals and aquatic resources. And the evidence mainly come from the lithic composition and the remains of animal bones. So here the picture showing the predominant lithic assemblage of hug, and that's the macrolith assemblage comprised by macroblade, scrapers, and arrowhead. And among them, the macroblade as shown in the right part, and they are usually used as the insect to be slotted in the bone or the wood shaft to be used as projectile point of the knives. And all these macroliths were made by fine-grained rocks like chert and jasper, chalcedony, and so on. And the useful analysis indicate that they are mainly used for processing animal resources. Well, as for the animal bones composition, we can find that the most frequent animal species found in hug are fish and bird, and followed by the roe deer and hare. And actually, the typical large mammals living in steppe, like the cattle or the horses, are very few in numbers. So that is really contrast with our stereotyped understanding of the subsistence of the steppe site. Because we might think that steppe species might take predominate, but the fact is not. And that, I think, is related with the macro environment of the hug site, because hug site is closer to the larger part of water body, and there might have the marshland and the meadows surrounded by at the early Neolithic period. So that provides people easy access to the fish and the migrate bird and some other highly reproductive medium-sized or small-sized animals. Okay, so then let's move on to the another site in Hulunbuir region, is the Tansan Block. And this site has got very intensive dating, and from that we can see that the site was mainly used during 8.4 to 6 kbp, but most intensively occupied at 7.8 to 7.5 kbp. And from this picture, we can see that the site was located on quite flat landscape, and there's no large water bodies surrounded by, but have springs, and that provide the necessary water resources for people to settle down. And as for the archaeological findings, this site have found 4 rectangular semi-subterranean dwellings, and among them, the house 1 was best preserved, and it's about larger than 40 square meters. And here is a drawing shows the shape of the house 1. And from it, we can see the layers of post house. And we can also see 4 pit structure, which is about 1 meter long and up to 0.4 meter deep, and filled with darker soils, flaking debitage, and bone. And the Tansan Block is very famous in Mongolian Republic because it's only one of very few sites in Mongolian Republic, which shows the permanent dwelling structures in such an early stage. But besides the pit houses, the recent discoveries in Tansan Block also found a surface dwelling structure, and it indicates the year-round use of this site with different types of structures related to warm and cold season occupation. Well, as for the economic basis of Tansan Block, we can say that it's also relied heavily on hunting and gathering, and animal resources predominate in the whole subsistence system. As for the lithic composition, it's also dominated by macrolith assemblage. But when we analyze the animal bones, we found that the people in Tansan Block emphasize on the intensive use of large steppe animals. For example, we can show the overwhelming emphasis of the use on auroch. And auroch is a kind of wild cattle lived in Eurasia continent, and it has now already got extincted. And then it's complemented by Kulan, which is a kind of wild Mongolian donkey, and horse, boar, gazelle, and hare. So also plenty species of animals, but more focus on the large games. And another interesting fund is that all the body part, whether hair or low utility, are all represented for large game. That indicates that either people acquire this large game nearby the site, or they make very intensive use of the large game resources. So the economic basis indicate that even though in one sub-region of Eastern Mongolian Plateau, people could actually have applied a very different kind of economic strategies to support the sedentary lifeways, because Tansan Block economic basis is quite different with that of Hak. And that means that people could make highly localized adaptation to their own microenvironment to figure out the best economic solutions to support the early sedentism. Okay, and after talk about the Hulunbuir steppe, let's look at the science of sedentism in Upper West Liao River Valley. And the Upper West Liao River Valley is located in the intersection of Mongolian Plateau, North China Plain, and the Northeast China Plain. Since it is located quite closer to the monsoon-affected Northeast China Plain, and it has relatively lower elevation, so the environment and the climate in this area is the mildest among the three subregions I talked about. And it has a hilly landscape, the distribution of loess. And the representative site of early Neolithic period in Upper West Liao River Valley is a Baiyin Changhan site. And this site contains occupational remains for 5 cultural stages, but the site was most intensively used in largest scale during the Xinlongwa cultural stage, which is about 8 to 7.3 kbp. And at Xinlongwa cultural stage, the settlement is about 2.2 hectares and is actually composed by 2 sub-settlements. Each of them is encircled with a trench. And within the trench, we can see the rows of houses laid quite neatly. And each of the sub-settlement have a larger house, and also each of them has a corresponding cemetery. And from this picture, we can see that the two sub-settlements are located at the Piedmont area, and the cemetery was located at the top of the mountain. So the layout structure of Bayan Changhan site indicates that people has very good settlement plans at that time period. Well, then let's look at the Bayan Changhan house structure. And actually, most of the houses in Bayan Changhan site are slightly smaller than the pit house found in Hulunbuir steppe, but they are more elaborately constructed. And for a typical house of Bayan Changhan, we usually can see a hearth located at the middle of the house and is surrounded by the stone slabs in 4 directions. And we can also see that the room closer to the hearth was separated away from the other rooms by the earth lump. And we can also see that the floor of the house was specially coated by the fired and hardened yellow mud. And we estimate this that is used for moisture isolation and to prolong the durability of the living floor. And we can also find that some of the houses in Bayan Changhan site shows the in situ deposition of the artifacts, and that mainly repressed by the piles of ceramics or stone tools put on the floor. And that's a very unique phenomenon. It indicates that people might probably temporarily leave the site for certain reasons, but they anticipate to come back later. So they have stockpiled some caches for the future use. And that means a kind of like intermittent occupation of the site instead of the very, very stable occupation of the site lasting for generations. And as for the economic basis of sedentism of Bayan Changhan site, we can call it as a mixtured hunting gathering and primary farming. And of course, we have found strong evidence of farming in Bayan Changhan site. Firstly, we found the specific farming tools, which are mainly composed by the stone hoe. And we also identified the foxtail and the broomcorn millet from the starch grain analysis. But we cannot overestimate the importance of farming, because in early Neolithic period, the millet-based farming was still at its primary stage of development and is not very productive. And also in Bayan Changhan site, we can say that the farming tools are still very simple and only coarsely made. And that is different from a whole suite of different types of farming tools employed by the full-time agriculturalists we can see in the later period in North China. And beyond farming, people also do a lot of hunting and gatherings. And as for the lithic assemblage of Bayan Changhan site, we can find that the most frequent tools are the grinding stone or the milling stone. And they are mainly used for processing both domesticated crops and other wild plant resources. And then it's followed by the farming tools. And macroliths are also present in Baiyin Changhan site, but in much lower proportion compared with that of Hag. So that means people in Baiyin Changhan site have more emphasis on the use of plant resources compared with the population of Hag or Tangsan block. But in Baiyin Changhan site, we can also find plenty of animal bones, even though they are in lower quantities and densities compared with Hag. That means the hunting was still important in Baiyin Changhan site, but seems did not play an overwhelming proportion in the whole subsistence system. And from the list of animal assemblage, we can see that the main type of animals hunted by people are the deers in different sizes. Okay, lastly, let's see the northern Yinshan mountain region. And that's also the area I worked in recent years. And the northern Yinshan mountain region actually located at the southernmost part of the three sub-regions. But since it has higher elevation compared with the two other regions, the environment actually is less mild than that in West Liao River Valley. And from this picture, we can see that the landscape is also it also has kind of hilly landscape. And the excavated site of early Neolithic period in northern Yinshan mountain region include Yumin and the Sima site. And these two sites actually located quite close with each other. And the radiocarbon dating shows that Yumin site was occupied between 8.4 to 7.6 kLkBP. And the dating result of Margot has not published yet, but it indicates a similar time range of Yumin site. And here are two aerial photos taken for Yumin and the Sima site. And we can clearly see that they represent a kind of small nucleated village. But the house distributions is more random compared with Baiyin Changhan site, which means that the settlement is less well planned compared with Baiyin Changhan. And it's also very interesting that we can find the Yumin site is mainly composed by the circular houses, while in Sima site, it has both circular house and the rectangular house. And here is a picture showing the circular house found in Yumin site. And here the rectangular house found in Sima site. And from this picture, we can see that a literally built rectangular house was broken part of an earlier built rectangular house. And another very interesting phenomenon we identified both in Yumin and Sima site is that people might at that time throw away most of their garbages within the houses because we did not find specific refusal zones beside the house. And we can find piles of lithic debitage, tools, and animal remains concentrated within the pit house. And this means that even though people settle down in this area and make substantial investment to build their permanent dwelling structures, but they haven't formed the habitat of frequently cleaning the living floor of the house as those of fully sedentary dwellers. So it clearly shows a transitional lifeways between highly mobile and fully sedentary lifeways. Well, as for the economic basis of sedentism of Yumin and Sima, we can see that people have relied on kind of very broad spectrum hunting gathering with minimal amount of primary farming. And here the photo shows the lithic assemblage of Yumin site. And here the photo showing the lithic assemblage of Sima site. And we can see that the lithic assemblage is highly diversified, indicating that people have designed different forms of tools for acquiring different types of resources. And further fine-grained comparison indicates that Yumin site has higher proportion of microblade and higher proportion of ant scrapers, while Sima site have higher proportion of farming tools and more diversified tool types of grinding stone tools. And that implies, in comparison, the dwellers in Yumin site more emphasize on the use of animal resources, while the dwellers in Sima site have more emphasis on the use of plant resources. And that difference reminds us the possibility that the two sites might be used mainly in different seasons of the year when different range of food resources are available. And we still need further research to either prove or disprove this estimation. And for the, one more thing I need to note is that even though Sima site has higher proportion of farming tools, but the farming tools in total still take a very low proportion in the whole lithic assemblage, and it has much fewer farming tools compared with Baiyin Changhan site. So in this way, we can see that the contribution of farming in northern Yinshan mountain region is smaller in the whole subsistence system compared with that in West Liao River Valley. And there are other lines of evidence for the economic basis. For example, the biological results indicate that people have used different plant species in northern Yinshan mountain region. And as for the zooarchaeological result, we found that people could hunt very highly diversified species, including both large, medium, and small animals. And they are mainly comprised by the steppe animals. And the most frequent species including kulan, cattle, hare, and deer. So after the talk about, we can make a brief comparison of the sedentary lifeways across these three regions. So firstly, for the degree of sedentism, we can find that all of these sites shows that people have quite intensive site use and investment. And of course, they do not move often and can stay in one place for a substantial time. But meanwhile, we can see that none of these sites show a very fully fledged sedentary lifeway. And also the degree of the sedentism differed from site to site. And in comparison, Baiyin Changhan site in general exhibits a higher degree of sedentism. Well, for the organization of the sedentism, we can see that Bayin Changhan, Yumin, and Simago all embody the nucleated village, and that more resembles to the small-scale farming village and quite different with the typical campsite of the nomadic herders appeared lately in these regions. While in comparison, Hag and the Tansan Black likely embody the coalescence of small hunter-gatherer communities. Well, for the economic basis of sedentism, we can find that all of these sites are not only relied on one or two specific productive resources, but actually relies on a wide range of the diversified resources, but in different compositions. For example, for the proportion of farming, Bayin Changhan is higher than Yumin and Simago, and none of agricultural evidence have found in Hag and Tansan Black. Well, for the proportion of hunting, Hag and Tansan Black is highest, and then followed by Yumin and Simago, and then followed by Bayin Changhan. Well, for the proportion of wild plant resources, Bayin Changhan might be the highest, and followed by Yumin and Simago, and then followed by Hag and Tansan Black. And of course, that's only a very preliminary and coarse-grained comparison. And we still need more advanced research to make more elaborate comparisons. And even though we found the attempts of early sedentism in early Neolithic period across Eastern Mongolian Plateau, but after the early Neolithic period, we can see that this trend is not developed continuously into fully fledged sedentism for the long run. And the sedentary lifeways end at different time periods across these three sub-regions by the end of the Holocene Climatic Optimum. And all of these three regions have adopted the nomadic lifeways with high mobility when the pastoralism has been fully established in Mongolian Plateau. And that means the early attempt of sedentism is highly correspond with Holocene Climatic Optimum. So in the most recent paleo-environment studies indicate that Holocene Climatic Optimum peaks in Eastern Mongolian Plateau at about 9 to 7 kbp. And the paleo-environment proxies indicate that at that time period, Eastern Mongolian Plateau was covered by a larger scale of water body and has larger vegetation coverage with more patchily distributed woodland than today. And that kind of Holocene climate amelioration not only improved the carrying capacities of the environment in general, but also changed the structure and distribution of the resources. And one of the most important change is that the expansion of water bodies and patchy forest has fragmented the homogeneous steppe and created a lot of ecozones, which are the intersections of two or more ecosystems, like the intersections of steppe and forest, or the steppe and the marshland. And usually these ecozones became very rich resource patch because it has accumulated and diversified range of food resources from different ecosystems. And that has created beneficial conditions for people to make intensive use of diversified resources within the circumscribed environment. And meanwhile, the increase of moisture and the temperature also decreased the possibility of drought and frost and prolonged the growing seasons. And that could be beneficial for the millet-based farming and make the primary farming become a viable option in the southern part of Mongolian Plateau, where have milder climate. So up to now, our research is only very basic research, and we still have more advanced questions waiting to be answered. Firstly, we need more quantitative analysis to evaluate the degrees, organizations, and the economic basis of early sedentism. And we also want to know the specific social factors impacting the appearance and the end of early sedentism in Eastern Mongolian Plateau. And also we want to know, did the early sedentary lifeways maintain a harmonious relationship between human and the environment, or cause certain tensions between the two? And that will provide us inspirations to look at the land use policies and strategies today. And a part of our research outcomes have been published on antiquity and entitled as Neolithic Pathways in East Asia, Early Sedentism on the Mongolian Plateau. And this only covers the Hulenbear Steppe and the West Liao River Valley, because northern Yinshan mountain region was still under research during the period when the paper is written. And the new works in northern Yinshan mountain region will be published in future. So thank you very much for your attentions, and welcome for the questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Zhao, for that great presentation. Now we'll turn to the question and answer portion. As a reminder, please type any questions that you have for Dr. Zhao into the question and answer box on Zoom. There is a button at the bottom of your screen that'll pull it up. It looks like we have a question from Mark. Mark says, I am having difficulty accepting that the garbage would be left in the house by people living there. Is it possible that they were keeping it in the house so that wild animals would not come around the house? And then at some point in the future, our equivalent to trash day, they take the garbage away from the house?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't think in that kind of direction. Yeah, it could be possible. But as for the situation of the Yumi and the Smago side, we can find that all the well-preserved house have a large quantities of artifacts, and a lot of them are the animal bones or debitage, and we cannot find the houses that in wild preservation but have very few garbage. So I think if the situation is possible that people throw away the garbage later, we should expect to find the houses with well-preserved conditions but have little garbages infilled inside. But we didn't see such pattern. So still, we'll still look for more evidence to see in future. Yeah, but it's a very good direction to think of the question.
Cool. We have another question from John. Can you develop more about the microblade function and their frequency in the lithic assemblages? I'm wondering if you performed microwear or residue analysis to establish the use of the microblade.
Okay. So microblade is like this type of the tool is very unique because it's not have particular forms. So its function is largely depend on like what kind of bone or wood shaft is attached to. So it could be like multifunctional depending on the which type of bone or wood shaft it attached to. So sometimes if it's attached to a very sharp pointed bone with slots on both sides, and we tend to think that they were probably served as projectile point or even a large arrowhead. But if it's like attached on a bone with only one side is slotted and have no sharp point, we will think that it might be used as a knife. So really depend on the particular shaft it's attached to. And for the micro used while analysis, it's not done by myself, but it's done by another researcher and mainly based on the materials on another early Neolithic site not far away from Hak. And she saw that a lot of the use wear on the macro list are either related to the soft materials, and that means probably the animal resources like fur and meat, and also a certain part of them are associated with a kind of hard materials like the bones. So it could either use for like dealing with animal resources like hunting and hunting and killing and and another possibility is that sometimes it might be used for like drilling and also to make manufacturing the bone tools. So, but we do not find the clear evidence of it used for processing plant, at least in the case of Hulen bear. But still, the range of functions of the microblade depend on different regions and might have regional variations.
And then we have another question from Dr. Alicia Ventresca Miller. She says, "Thank you for this fantastic talk. I am interested in the transmission of millet from northern China into Eastern Mongolia. Why do you think groups in the Eastern Plateau, for example, Tamsa Bulag, did not adopt early farming?"
Okay, well, that's a very good question. For the first part of the question, actually, we haven't solved the question of whether the millet-based agriculture have another independent original center in the southeast part of Mongolian Plateau, or is transformed from the more southern part of North China. So actually, we haven't solved the question because we can see that West Liao River Valley and some part of North China Plain show the simultaneous development of farming. So that's for the first part of the question. And and for the second part, we did not only see that Townsend Black has no evidence of farming, but also Huck in Hulunbuir has no evidence of farming. And that's probably related with the climate, because Hulunbuir region is located, like compared with other two sub-regions I talked about, it's located in higher latitude, which means that the growing season is very short. And the millet, both foxtail millet and broomcorn millet, requires a certain amount of days to grow and be material. And probably, even though in Holocene Climatic Optimum, the high latitude highland area have not enough growing season days for the growth of millet. And that could probably be a very simple reason why people cannot accept the millet farming.
Great. And then we have a question from Dr. Mike Galati. He says, are the various lithic raw materials locally available or imported? Is the latter imported from where? It looks like really excellent trip.
Yeah. As for the case of Hulunbuir region, is because sometimes when we say that it's locally available or imported from somewhere else, we need to set a standards of like how close shall we call it like locally available, and how far shall we say that it's imported from somewhere else. But I think in case of Hulunbuir, we can find such kind of raw materials in that step. So even though like people cannot find the raw materials quite nearby the site, they could probably not need to move long distance to get the raw material, because that range of raw material are available in Hulunbuir steppe. And for the West Liao River Valley and the Northern Yinshan Mountain region, the situation is a bit more complicated, because as for my research experience in Northern Yinshan Mountain region, we can find that part of the raw materials are available locally. But for another part of the very finely grained chert and the chalcedony and the jasper, they might not be acquired in very close distance. So, but the exact locations of this kind of materials are still unknown. That's our future research plan will cover the search of the lithic raw materials. That's also very, could be a very important clue to tell us the story of the lifeways of the people in this different part. Because if they settle down in one place for a long time period, but still acquire exotic raw materials from long distance, that means they could either make exchange with other communities, or it means that at least a part of the group still move far away to get these raw materials back. So it could tell us more stories about people's lifeways, and that will be a very important clue to find.
Great, thank you. That concludes our brown bag today. Thank you, Dr. Zhao, for speaking with us, and for everyone else for coming out today. We hold these talks almost every Friday here at 12 p.m., so stay posted for our next brown bag. Just a reminder, there is a department colloquia series this afternoon at 3 p.m. on Zoom. We'll have a link inserted in the chat below. The topic will be about Indian boarding schools and indigenous archaeology, presented by Dr. Davina Two Bears. Hope to see you all there, and thank you again so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.